I'd love to go around and get everybody's name and what grade you're in, and we're going to be talking about bugs today, so tell me your favorite bug, if you have one. All right, we start over here.
What?
Name, grade, favorite bug.
My name is Madragon. I am in 7th grade, going into 8th grade. I go to this school at Pests.
Do you have a favorite bug?
No.
Do you have a bug that you don't like?
I do.
Which is?
I love ants.
Ants, cool.
Ants are amazing.
Ants are very amazing. All right, and you?
Finn. Of course, I go to this school. I'm going to be in 8th grade starting in August. And my favorite bug is the trapdoor spider, specifically the ones that are blue.
Those are really cool. Those are fun to watch. Does anyone know what a trapdoor spider is? Yeah.
You want to hear me explain it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, well, it's a spider. It just makes a hole in the ground, covers the inside of the hole with webs, and makes its own tiny little trapdoor out of dirt, webs, and maybe sticks. And it waits for any unsuspecting bug to walk over the trapdoor, and then it pops open and just goes.
Yeah, it's really fun. I haven't seen those in Oregon, but in California where I used to live, I saw those a lot.
A spider was on top of my eye.
Ugh. Gross. All right, Ace.
Actually, it decided to fall asleep on my eye.
That is gross.
I sleep close to the ceiling, so anytime a spider enters my room, I'm terrified.
Ace, what? I know your name. Do you want to introduce yourself? No? Do you have a favorite bug?
Yes.
What is your favorite bug?
Among Us.
Bees.
Bees? I love bees too.
Especially those fuzzy bees, you know, the black and like the vibrant yellow bees.
Yeah, like the bumblebee, native bumblebees? Yeah.
Either bumblebees or scorpions.
Cool. Scorpions are crazy. We're going to learn a lot about bees today. And next to Ace?
Yael. I'm going to 8th grade. Favorite bug. Dragonfly or ladybug.
Cool. Those are good ones. Thank you. All right.
My name is Andres. I'm going in 7th grade. I don't like bugs. Please don't even show me a spider. I will scream.
Well, you don't have to touch any today. We'll just use our eyes to see them. Do you think any are cool at all? Maybe a cute one?
Not really. When I was little, I used to grab worms, but that's done.
Those days are over. All right, and next to
My name is Liam. I'm in 6th grade, and my least favorite bugs are gnats and mosquitoes.
yeah, those are pretty annoying ones. Do you? Oh, go ahead, Damien.
I'm going into the 8th grade, and
Yeah. Do you have any that you don't like? Neutral. All right.
my name is Tavon. I'm going into 8th grade, and my favorite bug is like a spider.
That's a good one. Cool. Thanks for sharing, everybody. So, like I said, we're going to talk about the good bugs, the bad bugs, and other garden helpers that are our friends and foes out there to help us in the garden. Is this?
Every other bug in this world pretty much serves a purpose.
Virus.
I was.
Mosquitoes are just weird.
I have it here. This was working. Okay, here we go. All right.
Bad bugs, good bugs, and other garden helpers.
Thank you. You be my narrator.
Or a person I didn't have.
So, in the garden, just like anywhere else we are in nature, if we have a healthy environment, then we're going to have a mix of good and bad critters. That's a good thing. We want that. We want it to be inviting to all creatures because that's what makes an environment really healthy and sustainable. The problem is when we have too many of a bad one or too much of a disease or something that throws the balance off, which can cause problems. So what we want to do is create a balanced environment where the good bugs can manage all the bad things and that we're taking kind of the action steps that we need to support everything in the system. So having bugs is a good thing. We shouldn't want to try to get rid of them. We should try to promote the good bads to handle all the bad stuff. Good bugs. Next one, how does this work? Oop.
Plant creators.
So why are some bugs bad for the garden? Anyone know?
They like to eat like organic stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Leanne?
They can, while they're eating stuff, they can also infect diseases
Mm-hmm.
into the plants.
Yeah. So a lot of them suck the juices out of plants, which if something was sucking your juice out of you like a vampire, you'd be pretty weak.
That does not
Well,
sound pleasant.
It's not pleasant. So, you know, they're essentially sucking out the vitality from plants and leaving them susceptible to disease and infection and, you know, loss of life. So if we're working really hard in the garden, we're trying to grow food, we don't want something that's sucking all the life out of it because it's wasting our time and energy. A lot of bugs also chew big holes in the leaves or destroy the fruit by making holes. So if you see a beautiful strawberry and you pick it, but it has a giant gooey hole on it, you're probably not going to eat it. So it's a waste. So we want to mitigate that happening. Why isn't it changing? Goes to like. So who are the bad bugs and what do they do? Can anyone identify these two kinds?
Caterpillars, they eat leaves, and leaves are how plants eat.
Yes.
Time to make this the opposite. Who are the good bugs and what do they not do?
We'll get to that one. So these are some of the bad ones. We have a snail on one side eating a cabbage and then aphids, which are my worst nightmare. So we have kind of three categories of bad bugs. We have ones that damage plants, ones that suck the juices, and then ones that cause diseases. So plant damagers like caterpillars. Caterpillars specifically love cole crops, which is like kale and cabbage and broccoli. So right now there are plenty in the garden. They are the larvae of moths and butterflies, which are helpers. So it's a tough balance to strike because you do want some caterpillars that can turn into butterflies, but you don't want them on your cabbage or your broccoli. Yeah, that is one tactic. You can have a host plant, so you can find out. It's also called a trap plant. So you basically plant something that you know they like, hope they all go to that one, and then you can keep your crops safe. Yeah. So they chew big ragged holes in leaves. They're pretty easy to identify. We're going to go out in the garden in a little bit, and we're going to look for the good and the bad bugs. So pay attention to what damage they do, because that's what we're going to look for is the damage. And usually when you find the damage, you can find the bugs. So they chew big holes on the edges of leaves and on the middle of leaves. And then when you turn the leaf upside down, you can usually see the little green guys on the bottom. Yes?
Another bug that does that are slugs.
Oh, yes. That's our next slide here.
Slugs can be pretty big.
We might not find...
I've seen one this big.
If anyone can find a slug, you'll get extra points because they're nocturnal. Why is it doing that? Okay, so slugs and snails are the next one we're going to talk about. And they're gastropods. That means stomach in their foot. So basically, they have a slimy foot that is their stomach. And everywhere they crawl, they leave a little snail slime trail. But they're also eating from that foot. That's pretty gross. They're in the mollusk family, which is the same as octopus and squid. And so they're like land mollusks.
Squid were cephalopods.
Well, octopus, it's like the higher categorization is mollusk. They're voracious eaters, especially for the tender parts of plants, which is usually the new plants. So when you have a tiny plant, like say this, if this was in your garden, a slug could eat this in one night. And you'd go back out and be like, where did it go? So you got to protect your young plants especially. They also eat the growing tips of plants, which can kill a plant because that's where the new growth comes from. So if you see a lot of slug damage or snail damage, what I do is I go out at night with a headlamp and I pick them all off. But they're pretty hard to control unless you do that. They all have eyes that come out on two stalks, which is kind of a funny feature of them. They're active at night and early in the morning, and they like gardens especially because they like wet areas, and gardens are usually places that are watered. So one good thing you can do to prevent slugs and snails is water in the morning so that it's dry again at night, and they kind of avoid the area. Yeah?
But here's another way to stop the slugs. So if you take like a yogurt cup and put beer in it, cheap beer, and then dig it in, the slugs will go for the beer, but they'll get stuck inside the cup.
Yep.
They won't be able to get out.
Yep, that is a really good way. A lot of people do that. So if you have access to beer or old beer, you can do that. You can sink a little cup of beer in the ground and they'll go to it. Again, they have to go to it. So if you have the energy or you want to get rid of the slugs, you can walk around with a cup and plunk them in there and you're actually covering more ground. Yes?
Speaking of, alcohol and plants, there's this one type of parrot, and it's either eats like this certain kind of like nectary flower or it eats fruit. Either way, whatever it was eating was really fermented, so thousands of parrots started getting really, really drunk and flying into people's homes.
That sounds terrible. Hopefully the slugs don't do that.
Funny to watch. It was really funny.
So slug damage is going to look a lot like caterpillar damage. It's going to be kind of like bumpy edges, or like I said, you might just see a little stalk without any leaves, and that's what the slug has done. So we'll look out for some slug damage. And sometimes you can turn over a rock or a log or a pot or something like that, and you'll see slugs on the bottom. That's where they like to hide during the day. So if we're looking for slugs, that might be a good clue of where to find them. Come on. I'm worried my computer is like on the verge of dying. Oop. Okay. So another plant damager. Yes, Ace?
I was gonna say, there's this one time that like I had this apple juice in this really warm backpack for like over a week, and I was going to drink it again. It fermented. But it was fermented.
Oh, geez. Yeah, don't do that.
I'm glad I didn't, because I was about to drink it at a basketball game.
Yeah, that would have been a terrible.
After I forgot my juice in the back. Well, some type of soda outside in my backyard.
So mushrooms?
And yeah, mushrooms actually grew.
Yeah.
And my mom started using it for food.
Theoretically, if you give any animal something that you can eat but fermented, you could get any animal drunk.
All right, y'all, let's stick back to the topic at hand here. We're going to talk about beetles and weevils now. So does anyone know what a beetle is? Have you seen a beetle before?
I've seen a beetle.
Never seen one in my life.
Lots of beetles.
They're really cool to hold and they're very tiny.
I've seen a cockroach.
Most beetles are awesome. There's so many that are really awesome good bugs, but there's some that are specific to certain plants that are really bad for that plant. So in the garden, there's like cucumber borers, there's weevils, there's pea borers. So these are ones that attack that certain plant, and they could really do a lot of damage. So beetles are characterized as hard-shelled insects. They can fly. They have soft wings under their shell. Like I said, many are good bugs. Ladybugs are beetles. But some feed on the fruit, buds, or flowers in their adult phase. So they have different phases of life. They go from egg or larva, and they grow up to adulthood. And in different phases, they'll feed on different things. So some in their larva phase will feed on the roots. Some will feed on the seeds or the fruit of plants as they're growing into their adulthood phase. So knowing what they do at certain phases is really important so that you can stop their destruction by using like a cover for your plant or pinching them off or cleaning up an area in the fall so that they're not staying there over the winter. A lot of them overwinter in gardens, so if you left a little stick pile, they might stay there all winter and then they'll come back the next year. So, yeah, weevils are pretty pesky. They create holes or shallow pits in seeds and fruit. Sometimes you'll open a pea or something and you'll see a hole like this one on this white bean here. Those are beetle holes, and sadly that means that that bean won't grow if you tried to plant it. So they can do a lot of damage. Now we're going to talk about the sapsuckers. So these are the vampires of the insect world. Most of them are soft-bodied and they have little sucking proboscis on their face. Aphids are especially notorious in the garden because they can get up to the thousands on a certain plant and really just annihilate it. And depending what they're eating, they turn the color of that plant, so it's really hard to even see them a lot of times. They reproduce really quickly. Actually, aphids can be pregnant when they're born, so they are already producing offspring before they're even born. It's disgusting.
So weird.
It is. It's so freaky.
Wait, what?
And the older they get, the bigger they get. They're still pretty small. And then the adult one grows wings and can fly to a new plant. So when they're larvae, they're pretty easy to control because they don't really move very quickly and they can't fly. So you can easily cut off damaged areas if they're really damaged. The problem is if you get rid of them on a plant, the plant might not come back to life. So they also like tender shoots of plants and like new growth. Damage looks like misshapen, curled, stunted, or yellow leaves, distorted or deformed flowers and fruit. It's pretty easy to see their damage. It definitely looks like a funky part of the plant. So we'll try to find some little sections of aphids out in the garden. They also create honeydew, which is kind of like an excretion that they have, which attracts ants. So sometimes you can follow a line of ants and you'll see they're basically farming the aphids. They take care of the aphids. So ants in themselves aren't bad critters, but they can accompany aphids and do a little bit of damage.
There's a really funny way to put this. Ants like to farm aphids' butt grease.
Yeah, pretty gross. And then the honeydew can produce fungus and bacteria, so sooty mold and powdery mildew. Those are all things produced by aphid honeydew. Another sapsucker that we'll probably see in the garden because they're pretty prevalent in the summer is whiteflies. So right now they'll look like little tiny white triangles on the underside of leaves. They're pretty hard to spot until there's a whole bunch of them, and then you touch a plant and it's like a cloud of white stuff. Yeah, and then they also have little tiny like eggs that will be underneath the plants too. They're on the underside of leaves, so we'll look under there to find them. They feast on the young parts of plants also. Oops. And they can overwinter and produce all year round. They especially like stressed plants, so at the end of the summer, as plants are getting a little sun-stressed, that's when you'll see a lot of them. Damage looks like weakened plants that can't carry out photosynthesis. The leaves wilt, turn pale or yellow, and this growth is stunted. They also create honeydew like aphids do, which again can lead to diseases. So diseases aren't directly always caused by insects, but the damage that insects do can open up the plant to disease. So protecting our plants from pests also is protecting them from disease. So once a plant has the life force sucked out of it, obviously it's going to be weakened for opened up to disease. So how can we protect our garden from pests? We can encourage good bugs, beneficial insects. We can choose resistant varieties where possible. A lot of seed packs will say disease resistant or resistant to certain bugs, so it's good to look out for that on your packs. We can use physical barriers. Like I said, we can put a cover over our plants in certain months so that when a certain bug is in its flying adult stage, it can't get onto the plant, so then it can't carry out a life cycle on that plant. We can also keep plants really healthy by keeping the soil healthy, keeping plants watered and not stressed out. As soon as something's stressed out, just like humans, once we're stressed out, we're opening ourselves up to illness and disease. It's the same with plants. And we can also rotate crops. So if you're always planting a tomato in a certain place and it's always getting a bug, it's probably the place where in the ground that certain bug is living throughout the winter. So if you put the plant there again, you're just promoting another life cycle of that same thing. So if you move the tomato to a different spot, then the bug now has to find that new spot. So you're kind of breaking up that life cycle a little bit. So that's one good way, always moving your plants around in new spots. So let's talk about the good guys. Here's a ladybug chowing on an aphid. So there's basically three kinds of good bugs. There's pollinators, there's pest killers, which are kind of like assassin bugs, and then there's critters that are building soil. Yes?
Non-pollinators, pest creators, soil destroyers.
Are the bad ones?
The opposite.
Okay. So who are the good bugs and what are they doing in the garden? Here's some of them. There are so many, and if anyone wants to have a look at any of these books I brought, it's you can read through pages and pages of good and bad bugs. Yes?
There's parasitic wasps. There's one that I think is missing from this, and that is spiders that eat a lot of the bugs that are considered pests.
Spiders are good.
Especially mosquitoes.
Oh yeah, I don't have spiders on there. I have spiders on one of the next slides though.
Why is parasitic wasps one of the good ones?
Well, they are, so a lot of parasitic wasps, they'll lay their eggs on bad bugs, on the bodies of bad bugs, and basically become parasites of that bug. So they'll kill the bug in the process of having their own eggs. So for that reason, they're really good. And a lot of them are pollinators as well.
Like a chest burster.
Yeah, they're pretty gross.
That is because the eggs use the nutrients from that bug.
Yep.
Yeah, it's like a chest burster.
Yeah, it's pretty freaky, but it's helpful in the garden. Yep. So there's so many good bugs that we're not going to have a chance to talk about, but we will talk about as many as we can, the ones that we see the most. Why is this not working so well? Ooh. Well, this is not a picture of the right thing. You have to use your imagination. I think everybody probably knows what a bee looks like. So pollinators are insects that go from plant to plant and pollinate the flowers. So they're actually not after the pollen. It's kind of a byproduct, but they're after the nectar of the flowers. But in the process, they're collecting pollen on their legs or in their pollen baskets, as they call it on bees. And then as they go to the next flower, they're dropping a little bit of pollen. So they're working to pollinate and also gather food for themselves. They're usually very, very busy. They spend their entire day working and they have a short lifespan. So they work pretty much through their entire life. So pollination is essential for producing fruit, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Without pollination, we wouldn't have the next generation of plants. So it's pretty important that they are working, and we want to promote them in our garden as much as we can. Then there's predators. So things like ladybugs, lacewings, spiders, praying mantises. So they are all feeding on pest bugs. This is actually a ladybug larva.
Oh yeah, they look kind of weird.
Yeah, so in this phase of being a ladybug, they can eat 40 aphids an hour. So they're just constantly eating. They're pretty helpful in the garden. And I bet we'll see some of these. If we find any aphids, look closely because I bet you see some of these guys on there too.
Sweet if you could buy a bag of those rather than a bag of normal ladybugs.
You can.
Dump them everywhere and then
Yeah, you can actually. If you bought ladybugs, you'll often get the larvae because they don't fly away, so they're easier to keep in your garden. So, like I said, ladybugs eat pests in all stages of their life cycle, and adult ladybugs can eat 50 aphids per day. So really the babies are the ones that they're chowing down on all those aphids. And it's really good to leave some aphids and not always try to cleanse your garden of all of them, because when you're leaving them, then you're inviting ladybugs to come and feast, essentially. Next slide. Okay, and then there's soil builders, which we talked a little bit about last week if you were here. So caterpillars, pill bugs, earthworms, centipedes, and also bacteria and fungus. So all of those things are actively breaking organic matter down to make soil. So we want to encourage those in the garden by creating places for them to go and hide and be healthy. So how do we encourage good bugs in our garden? We need to provide the basics of life, just like anything else: food, shelter, water, and a healthy environment. So food, we want to plant flowers that encourage good bugs to come and eat the nectar, and we want to have something that's blooming in all months of the year. So we also want to leave pests around to provide food for them to eat if they're pest eating. We want to provide some water. Usually a shallow dish of water is good, like the saucer that goes in the bottom of a pot or something. There's also a lot of plants that create their own little basins of water. So as you're watering, you can see where water collects, and that's a good place for bugs to drink. Yeah, sometimes, but it's good to have static water for them. And if you have a shallow dish, I like to put like a rock or a cork or something like that that protrudes out of the water or that floats, so that bugs have something to land on, because it's hard for them to, like, if you have dishes of water out, you'll see like dead bugs in them a lot of times because they'll fall in. So you want to have something they can land on.
Try to drink out of my pool, but they end up almost drowning. I usually say I'm with the pool net.
Yeah.
They end up almost drowning because they have nothing to stand on.
Yeah, exactly. And then you want a healthy environment. So we want to try to not use pesticides or other chemicals. A lot of people use chemicals to make their lawn green, or they use pesticides to get rid of like all the bad bugs. But what you're actually doing is getting rid of good bugs too, and damaging some other parts of the ecosystem. So trying not to use pesticides and other chemicals is a good approach. And there's lots of ways to manage pests without using chemicals. Like this, your fingers are the best way to manage pests without chemicals. Birds are also really good too. So some beneficial plants that attract the good bugs. Native plants, a lot of native plants are great to have because native plants are awesome because you don't need to water them. They grow naturally in the environment. They don't need special soil. They love being where they are with this kind of atmosphere and this kind of rain that we have. So, and the native bugs love them because obviously that's been their food source for millennia. So things like yarrow, poppies, checker mallow, goldenrod, penstemon, lupin, those are all good native plants for bugs. Herbs are amazing to attract pollinators. If you ever have any herbs in an herb garden or something, you'll see millions of bugs on them. Oregano and sage, mint, dill, parsley, thyme, those are all great bug attractors. And then basic flowers like dandelion. Dandelion's usually one of the first foods that bugs have, so leaving some of those around your garden is a good idea. Queen Anne's lace, which we'll see out in the garden today. Marigold, calendula, feverfew, zinnia, cosmos, dahlias. Those are all kind of your garden flowers and bug attractors. So great to have. Come on. Okay. So here's a couple more pictures. Does anyone know what this one is? This one's pretty obvious. The ladybug. So ladybugs can be pink, red, orange. They can have no dots, 2 dots, 7 dots.
Oh, I heard that the number of dots on a ladybug is like how old they are.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true. There's different varieties have different amounts of dots, but
I'm pretty sure there's a fake one that is poisonous that has a certain amount.
I don't know of any that are poisonous. Oh, I turned right to the page. You can
Ladybug.
come check out some different kinds in this book. There's some pink ones. I've seen a lot lately that have no dots at all. They're kind of interesting to see. This is a lacewing. This is a really helpful garden predator. Their larvae look a lot like ladybug larvae. They're a little bit longer and they have brown stripes. So we'll see if we can find a larva from each of those. And this is a pest that we'll see a lot of right now. This is a cabbage worm. So the cabbage moth is really actually a helpful pollinator. And they're pretty cute in the garden, but their larvae, their caterpillar, are really voracious eaters, and they'll take down an entire kale plant pretty quickly. So we got to find a good balance of having some of them, but not too many to eat all of our plants. Okay, so Delia made this fun game for us. So we're going to look at each slide, and we're going to see if we can identify which one is the good and which one is the bad. This one's pretty easy because we just talked about them.
Ladybug good, caterpillar bad.
Yep.
Wait, is that it?
What about these?
Bees good.
I love bad.
Does anyone remember what this is? Yes. How about these?
Right one.
Left one.
Slug, and does anyone know what the one on the yellow is?
That's a
Is that a form of pollinating fly?
It's a hoverfly. So they're predatory flies. They'll suck the sap out of other pest bugs. They're really tiny. They're really fun to watch because they hover and then they'll attack other flies that come into their zone. So you can kind of identify them from doing that. What about these guys? Very good, you guys.
What?
Is that one the last one? I can't tell, or if my computer's just frozen.
no, your computer's doing it.
I think that was the last one. Oh no, there's more slides here. Where's?
Oh well, let's go.
Oh, here we go. Okay, so another thing we can do to attract good bugs is create habitat. So we're going to go out in the garden and look at some bug habitats that are already here. And I love setting up bug habitats. It's super fun. I do it at a lot of schools. You can do it out of all kinds of recycled materials and natural materials, and you can get really creative thinking like a bug, like what would they like to live in. So basically what it is protecting them from the elements. So it's giving them a place to lay their eggs and keeping it safe from snow and heavy winds and winter weather. So it's a place where they can go and lay their eggs and it'll be safe until spring. Some bugs, like mason bees, they like tubes. Some like little holes drilled in wood. Some like cracks, like butterflies, they like a little thin crack. They fold up their wings and slide right into it. Some bugs, like beetles, they'll prefer leaf and stick piles. So it's good to leave like a little bit of clutter in your garden, like a stick pile, so that ground-dwelling beetles, which are really awesome for building soil and for eating soil pests, so they can live and overwinter. And then some bees need mud or other nesting materials close by so that they can finish making their nest. So there's lots of different kinds of bees. Does anyone know how many bees are in the world? Not like individual bees, but like types of bees.
Quite a few.
Any guess?
It's in the 10,000.
More than that.
In the 100,000?
Less than that. There's 20,000 kinds of bees in the world.
That's what I meant, like the over
10,000.
10,000.
Right on, yep.
Green and blue bees near my house.
What about how many bees are in the U.S.? How many types of bees in the U.S.? Any guesses?
Probably a whole bunch.
Not as much as there should be.
There's 4,000 types of bees in the U.S. native to here. And in Oregon alone, there's 500 kinds of bees. So everybody thinks of bees, they think of honeybees that make a hive, but that's not how all bees are. There's social bees, like honeybees, that live in a hive, and then there's solitary bees. And actually, solitary bees do thousands times more work than honeybees do. And they're native, and they live in little holes in the ground. So they're really easy to invite into the garden and really easy to promote them around, and they actually do so much more work than honeybees do. So it's really easy to care for them and invite them in and keep them around. Mason bees are really awesome.